So we're going to talk about this extraordinary organ in your body called the human brain. We're going to do a very big picture talk on addiction. So this is the cover of National Geographic in September of 2017. It looks like you saw it. It is entitled The Physiology of Addiction. Do you still subscribe to National Geographic? Does anybody else still subscribe? But most of us grew up with National Geographics in our basement, like stacked up, because we would never recycle them. And this cover and this article and the video online is all excellent. It's very actual, it's very well explained. If you have to go back and teach this to somebody else, you have to go back to a health class or go talk to your local sheriff or a local state legislator about this, you could use this as a tutorial because it's very well done. It also goes into the details of how the brain breaks addiction, and I'm going to cover it too, but I'm not going to deny that what I will review with you is going to be a little bit more superficial. The part of the brain that breaks with addiction is known as the lizard brain. It's the most ancient elemental part of the brain. And for the 200,000 years that we've been in this human form on this planet, this is what's kept us alive. It's the reward circuit of the brain that tells you to find food, water, and a mate. Because your entire purpose on this planet to send your genetic material forward and keep them alive. Now, most of us don't think of ourselves that way, honestly, but in the zombie apocalypse, that's what we will all be doing. Because the most elemental being of who we are is to survive long enough that you keep the next generations alive. That's what we are as creatures. You know, whether we're a cricket or a koala, it all looks like this. The problem is this reward center of the brain, this part of the brain that tells you to live or die, is the part of the brain that gets broken. If you could pick up addiction and put it anywhere else in the brain, you lost some short-term memory when you got addicted. You put it into the auditory cortex and you lost your high-pitch and low-pitch sound acumen. Who cares? It would be a really easy disease to treat, but that's not what is impacted in the brain. The part of the brain that tells you to live or die is the part that breaks with addiction. And it is the reason why it is much better to prevent addiction with great prevention, right, in our schools and with our young people, and by acknowledging who's at highest risk. Much better to prevent it than to treat it, because treatment, and that's what I do all day long, is treatment of addiction, is really challenging. Is it possible? Sure, people get better, but it's a hard disease to treat. And so I'm a normal family doctor. I take care of brand new babies and really old people and every chronic disease on the in-between, but I also spend a lot of my day working with people either incarcerated or not, and who are struggling acutely with addiction. So racing through this part of the brain is the neurotransmitter called dopamine. And dopamine is the holy smokes, that was awesome, do it again chemical. It says that was great behavior, it's going to keep you alive for another day, keep it going, right? And so with this chemical in the brain are two behaviors, perseveration and compulsion. I have to do this, I cannot stop thinking about it. And for your ancestors, they were awesome at being compulsive and perseverating because you exist today. And for that to have happened, your great-great-great-great-greats had to go to bed, and the last thing they needed to think of is how am I going to find enough calories to keep my people alive? Because it was really hard to survive, right? For the 99.9% of the time that Homo sapiens have been here, we barely scraped by on a day-to-day basis. These days, I stopped for gas on the way here, there was 20 billion calories at checkout, right? None of us in this room are going to starve, right? We are like living in the Western world. We got some extra supply. We're all good for a while, right? So, but from an evolutionary standpoint, you needed to perseverate and you needed to be compulsive about survival. And the problem is, it's this part of the brain that breaks, and those two behaviors of compulsion and perseveration define addiction too. So who in this room works daily or sometimes with people who struggle with addiction? Right, so you know what it's like. Like you love them and you want to smack them sometimes because relapse is common and it's challenging and you get frustrated too and they get mad and frustrated too. But when I remind myself I'm dealing with somebody who has this part of their brain, the compulsiveness and the perseveratingness that they have define the disease. And it's really hard not to go to bed and have the last thought you have not be about when I'm going to get my next drink, when am I going to get my next fix. It's the way it works. So I make an argument that on average we all have a certain amount of dopamine in our brain, and I make an argument it's about 100 units. Now there's no measurable way to do this, there's no serum blood draw looking at dopamine, but some of us, and we know these people, are the golden retrievers of the planet. They are happy, they got a silver lining to every cloud, and their baseline dopamine is sitting at 108. They feel good every day. People like me actually have slightly lower dopamine. I may be sitting at an 85 or 90. I do a lot of stuff to make my brain better. I exercise a lot. That's why I'm like, oh, look, there's weights we can be lifting while we're talking. I know what makes me feel better, and that's one of the skill sets for those of us who actually sit at lower levels. We know what it takes to make us feel good, and we try to actualize that plan, particularly if it's healthy behaviors. So what happens to the brain if its normal baseline level is 100 units of dopamine, and it finds that perfect food, which today may be different than what it was 200 years ago, but 200 years ago out here, you went out in the woods and you killed a 5-point stag that was going to keep your clan alive for another week or two, you got a spike in dopamine because your brain said, holy smokes, that was awesome, do it again, okay? And your dopamine went to 150 and then it went back to normal. It's a real survival thing. You have sex, it's consensual, your dopamine goes to 200 and then it goes back to normal. That's what happens, okay? The problem is when you start getting exposed to drugs or behaviors that spike your dopamine out of what's considered normal range. So you use a drug like cocaine and your dopamine will spike to 350. You use a drug like heroin or a really strong prescription opiate or fentanyl, if that's what you're looking for these days, and your dopamine will go between 500 and 900. And when you use a drug like crystal methamphetamine, your dopamine goes to about 1300. So I just described something that's at least 6 times the best sex you've ever had. And what's amazing is that most of us don't hop up in the morning and take a hit of meth. Because you would think I'm describing something that seems like a good idea, right? Okay. So let's talk about what happens. 3 things are in this equation with the dopamine system. It's an equation that gives us our total amount. How much dopamine is produced, how much dopamine is allowed to be active in the synaptic cleft, or the active part of the brain, and how many dopamine receptors are on the other side of the synaptic cleft receiving information. Cocaine works in one way. All it does is turn off the vacuum. So the vacuums is what sucks dopamine out of the active part of the brain. So one single drug does one very simple thing and it builds up this dopamine of 350. You would think that because it has such a simple, easily understood mechanism of action, it'd be easy to treat. We have no good treatment for cocaine use. Stimulants, when you abuse a stimulant, you're actually really hard to treat. You just need abstinence and support around abstinence. There's no magic pill that's going to make this one better. The way heroin or all opiates work is slightly different, and it's a complicated system through a negative feedback loop through the GABA receptors, but at the end of the day, every opiate out there makes more dopamine in the brain. So we could do this talk with every single addictive substance or behavior, sex, gambling, sugar, nicotine, name it, right? At the end of the day, it ends up in the dopamine system. Sometimes there's 14 steps before you get there, and I can't describe or walk you through the pathway of video game addiction. I can't do it, but it ends up in dopamine somewhere. And it will impact one of those 3 things in the equation. So the problem is for the 200,000 years that our brains have seen normal dopamine, right? 85 to 105, with these nice spikes that have to do with survival, good food, good sex. That is normal. So sitting between 85 and 200 is what your brain is used to. And when your brain starts seeing dopamine levels of 350 or 900 or 1300, your brain says, oh my God, something is wrong here. It doesn't happen the first time, right? The brain says, huh, that was weird, that was awesome, but weird. But over a period of time, a period of a few weeks or a period of a couple months, your brain starts to say, there's something wrong, the volume is too high, I need to down-regulate in order to reach homeostasis. So I'm going to erase 80% of my dopamine receptors. I'm going to stop making any dopamine at all, and I'm going to turn on every vacuum in sight to suck the dopamine out. So when you struggle with addiction, you wake up in the morning, and your new baseline dopamine is a 40. You are a miserable human being. You are sick, not just from physiological withdrawal, but your brain has levels of dopamine that are not consistent with survival. That person would not have lasted long, right? And your brain says there's something wrong with your brain and you need to fix it and you know how to fix it, so do it. Your brain is screaming at you to drink. It is screaming at you to find heroin. It is screaming at you to pick up the cancer stick even though you know smoking is trying to kill you, right? That's what it does. That first cigarette in the morning is the hardest one to get rid of, right? I have people who are down to just one cigarette, but it's the first one in the morning because that brain is screaming. And what's extraordinary is that people get better. People walk into a treatment center of their own free will and say, I want to go through the pain and misery of getting off of this stuff and be physically miserable. And I am willing to suffer through the first many, many, many months of having my dopamine be so low that my brain is screaming at me, because it takes time to get better. And people do get better, but it doesn't happen in 7 days, it doesn't happen in a month. You know, healing yourself from a heroin addiction is a good 24 months of long-term sobriety and a lot of support and a lot of other positive things that are going to rebuild the dopamine in your brain. So it's just a concept that is what people don't seem to understand. This is what leads to the broken brain, right? This is no different than diabetes. I can talk you through the pathway of how type 1 and type 2 diabetes work. It looks just like this, except I'm dealing with the pancreas and not the, the ventral tegmental area of the brain. This is like every other chronic disease we take care of, except, lo and behold, nobody learned about it in medical school, and they didn't appear to learn about it during residency, and most primary care doctors don't know what they're doing. And they don't want the addicts in their waiting room. So here we have a disease that affects many Americans, whether it's opiate use or alcohol misuse or addiction to nicotine. I mean, nicotine remains the #1 killer in the country. Yet most people can't actually access good care, and that is actually the problem. So I guarantee you this happened in Acton. And what is, if you guys cut your finger really badly and you need stitches, what ER would you go to? You go to Emerson. You guys would go to Concord. That's your closest one. So this is nothing against Emerson. Emerson's a really good little, cute little community hospital, but this definitely happened at Emerson Hospital this week. I just know this. So this is a guy, he lives in Maynard. He's 68 years old. I knew him. I met him once 4 years ago. And he's having some really serious indigestion after lunch, sort of clutching at his chest. And his wife's like, "You don't look so good." He's like, "No, no, no. I just made a strong sandwich." And she says, "I'm calling 911. So in a town like Maynard, EMS, fire, police, they are all there in his living room. The whole town is in his living room, right, pretty darn fast. And they look at this guy and they're like, "Dude, you look terrible," right? And they give him some lingual nitroglycerin, they can chew a baby aspirin, they get a big bore IV in him, they hang some morphine, maybe they hang some beta blocker, and they transmit that EKG, because they have a really nice cardiac ambulance, to Emerson. And Emerson said, "Whoa, don't bring him here, bypass us, bypass us." You get him to Leahy, the traffic's different patterning, maybe you give him the Mass General, but he is too sick for us, right? Because this guy's having a massive anterior wall MI. And the Leahy says, "We're not even going to warm up the cath lab, this guy's going to the OR, he needs quadruple bypass surgery, and we're going to try to get that done in the next 3 hours." So this guy ends up with quadruple bypass surgery at the Leahy, and he then is on the cardiac ICU for another week, and then he gets telemetry for another week, and then he gets to go back to Emerson and do his 12 weeks of cardiac rehab, and he gets a new therapist because he gets depressed. He finally makes an appointment with me as primary care doctor. He gets a Y membership that his insurance pays for, and he gets better, right? It's good. It's a good, positive story. How much money do we spend on him? Thousands is an understatement. How much?
Tens of thousands.
Hundreds of thousands. $250,000, $250,000. That's a lot of work. Cracking somebody's chest open and putting in, harvesting new vessels, not easy. Okay, his next door neighbor in Maynard, literally the woman who lives next door to him, is this 24-year-old you see lying on the floor. She moved back to Maynard and moved back in with her mom about 8 months ago. And she started struggling with opiates when they were prescribed to her after she had an ACL tear playing soccer in college. She realized that she never felt better in her entire life, and for the first time she felt normal. And the pills got cut off pretty fast because most people aren't prescribing a lot of opiate pills to a 19-year-old, but she realized there was something even better and cheaper and more available out there, so she converted to heroin by the age of 20. She's 24 now, and she's been doing really well for the last 9 months. She got out of a bad relationship in a neighborhood that wasn't helping her. She's been going to a Suboxone clinic. She has insurance. She goes to meetings almost every day. She's a new therapist who's really helping her treat some of her baseline anxiety that she's had, history of some trauma that's never been dealt with. She just got a job. She's pumped about it. She hasn't had like a job with a real paycheck in forever. Just got a Dunkin' Donuts job. Just got her first paycheck last week. Things are feeling pretty good for her. So when her mom knocks on that bathroom door that morning and there's no response and the door is locked, her mom freaks out and kicks it down and finds her daughter lying on the ground, not breathing, and blue. She does what everyone's supposed to do and calls 911 first, and then starts basic life support, but gives her a dose of naloxone, the overdose reversal agent, also called Narcan, because this is a smart mom who loves somebody who has an opiate use disorder, and she carries Narcan on her. So that young woman does not come alive again. But this time, we have Maynard cops are there instantly. And what do? They have Narcan too. They each have 2 vials in their patrol cars. Luckily, 2 patrol cars show up because they go through all 4 vials with this young woman before she comes back to life. They put her in the ambulance and bring her down to Emerson ER. And what's offered to her? Did you say
overnight?
Nothing? Overnight? They keep her overnight? Yeah, maybe. If she's really, really lucky and really, really sick, maybe. But there's no reason to keep her overnight in the hospital. She denies suicidal thoughts, right? She didn't do this intentionally. What else is given to her? Who sees her? Yeah, somebody who works in the ER came down and said hi to her.
Probably gave her a prescription and sent her on her way to call somebody.
Yeah, they probably told her mom to get more Narcan because she's probably going to need it. Maybe gave her a trifold brochure with a bunch of telephone numbers on it. Make some phone calls. Let me tell you about her next door neighbor, the guy who lives next door, a 68-year-old guy. Both of his parents had significant cardiovascular disease. His dad had a heart attack at the age of 57 and died. His mother had a stroke at the age of 68, his exact age. She lived for a couple of weeks. She was in the neurosurgical ICU at the Lakey, interestingly, but then she died. He smokes a pack and a half of cigarettes every day. He kicks back a 12-pack of beer every day, and he goes to McDonald's 3 times a week. Does he have addiction? What's he addicted to? Junk food, yeah. Sugar, fat, salt, alcohol. What else? Nicotine, yeah. Did he create his heart attack?
Yes.
Yeah, he has some genetics. I'll give him a little credit on the genetics, although both of his parents were smokers. So to say it, once you add smoking in, the genetics may or may not play a role. Smoking is what kills people, right? So this guy's an addict, right? Who's going to deny that to me? He's an addict who created his disease that I just dropped $250,000 on, right? Did anybody roll into that living room and be like, you know what? I'm actually not going to provide medical care for you. Did he show up at the Lakey and they wagged their fingers at him and say, you know what? Actually, there's more deserving people on this planet than you, dude. So I'm going to cool down my operating room, right? I'm going to tell the cardiothoracic surgeon not to bother coming in for you because you created your disease. Nobody did that to him. And don't get me wrong, don't hear that I'm saying you should do that. My job as a primary care doctor is to take care of chronic diseases. That's what I do all day. I take care of people who are doing the best they can. And nobody I take care of is perfect. You know what I ate here? I drank some water and I ate peanut M&Ms. That's the only food I ate today, right? Terrible. Makes me feel terrible. I'm going to have a day where I actually won't get any exercise even though I know I need to. I just don't have time to do it today. So who in this room is going to have a perfect day and a perfect week where you do everything right for your health? Are you guys all that good? Really? You look like you're pretty healthy over there. You're probably like a good exerciser and a good eater. But the rest of us, on a day-to-day basis, make some decisions that aren't as good. Now, are all of us kicking back a 12-pack and smoking a pack and a half? I hope not, because those are unhealthy behaviors. But if I started to shame and blame everybody who walked in my office, right, for their tendencies and behaviors that lead them down an unhealthy path, first of all, I would have no patience. I would be twiddling my thumbs at my desk, because who would ever want to see me, right? Our job in medicine is to meet people where they are, to acknowledge their struggles and help move them in small ways, incremental change down a pathway of healthiness. It's not easy. Do you know how often I sit with somebody and say, you and I know that your biggest health risk is the extra weight that you carry. And in a magic Harry Potter world, I would, magic wand 20 pounds off your gut. That's what I would do. And instead, what most of us know is it's hard to lose weight, right? I have been trying to lose 10 pounds for, I don't know, 5 years. Haven't done it, never once. Because guess what? I don't want to sacrifice all the stuff it would take. It makes me too mad. And then every time I've lost a little, I gain it right back, plus some, right? Because making healthy changes in our life is really challenging. This guy getting off cigarettes and alcohol is actually really a hard thing to do. Nicotine is one of the hardest addictions to stop. And the reason I do this work is I find this outrageous. I find the disparity in care that we provide to different kinds of human beings appalling. And the fact that our emergency rooms and our hospitals are not actually responding to this current epidemic in an aggressive way really takes me off. It just does. And I get to say this because I'm a doctor. If you were a room full of doctors, if you were a room full of CEOs and CMOs of hospitals, I would be doing this exact conversation without holding back. There are very few hospitals in this country who are actively responding to this epidemic in an evidence-based way. Mass General's doing a pretty good job. Boston University's doing a pretty good job. I'm going to give those two some credit. But most other hospitals are sort of like, whatever, it's not our problem. Yet they also know it's actually really, really their problem. Because people who struggle with addiction cost a huge amount of money. And they will be decimating some of our community hospitals. You get one case of endocarditis, which is an infection of your heart valve, that's $200,000. And these are people who are either uninsured or they're on mass health. At the end of the day, it's coming out of your pocket. So not treating addiction costs a lot more money than actually taking care of it. Dopamine, let's go back to dopamine. So that middle column there is a healthy brain, a thriving brain. All that orange you see is dopamine racing around. In the column you see over to the right, this is a brain of somebody who struggles with cocaine. This is a brain of somebody who uses crystal meth, somebody who struggles with an alcohol use disorder, and somebody with heroin. Just stare at the alcohol use disorder for a second. There's a surprising amount of dopamine there. The wheels come off the alcohol bus pretty late in the game. There are a lot of us who are functional alcoholics. There are a lot of us who show up at work and take care of our kids okay-ish and walk the dog and keep an okay house, even though we actually are struggling with alcohol. And it takes a while before you've gotten your second OUI and you're getting bailed out of jail, before your job performance ratings start to decline enough that you lose your job, or before your husband walks out on you. So, and that literally is, there's a neurologic reason for this. It just takes a while for the brain to break down with alcohol. Now, that happens faster for women. I'm going to talk about women and alcohol in just a couple minutes, but women are impacted with alcohol at a much higher rate, much more quickly, with, I'm not going to say more severe damage, but with sort of a faster pace to damage. So there are three things that will predispose any one of us to addiction. The first one is genetics. The second one is early exposure while the brain is developing. And the third one is a history of childhood trauma. Having poor mental health does not mean you will become addicted. I want to take a break on that thought though. Poor mental health can be a subcomponent of the other things. If you are a 14-year-old kid who's struggling with anxiety and you realize that you're actually the life of the party when you drink at the age of 14 and you become the kid that everybody else wants to hang out with, you're going to be a 14-year-old who has early exposure while the brain is developing to an addictive substance because you were self-medicated. So it wasn't the anxiety that created the addiction, it's the anxiety that gets self-medicated with an addictive substance that then creates it, okay? So lots of our kids struggle with anxiety, depression, another kind of mood disorder, and it doesn't mean that that's a setup, okay? But you can imagine how poor mental health is a subcomponent of those other things. So the genetics of addiction are enormous. It is hard to find any other disease that has this kind of genetics. There's a couple of mental health disorders. Bipolar disease is one, and ADHD is the second one that have very strong genetics with them too. I rarely make an ADHD diagnosis in a family if I don't have some other generation above that that also struggles, because that's very atypical. But if you have a parent or a grandparent who struggles with addiction, you have about a 50% chance of developing addiction yourself. It's a pretty big number. And who should know that? Yeah, your children actually should know that. And I think it's really hard for people who are parents and grandparents and aunts and uncles to actually imagine that. But I'm telling you that you kind of need to tell your kids the truth about their genetic risk for addiction, because although they don't get to change their parents, nobody gets to choose their genetics, right? What they do in this next slide actually almost entirely erases their genetic risk. So they actually do get to control something, right? And that's why you need to tell them. You need to inform them of their risks so they can make better choices. So what we know is that all addiction is considered a developmental pediatric disease. It starts while the brain is developing. If you can get to the age of 23 or 24 not having used an addictive substance, the likelihood of you developing addiction is 1%. 99% of all addiction is prior to the age of 23 or 24, period. Every year that you delay your use of an addictive substance drops your rate by 8%. So, when you, in this room, for those of you who work with people who struggle with addiction, ask somebody, how old were you with your first substance? Was it alcohol, marijuana, or nicotine? Those are my three easy ones. What are the average ages that you hear, the average age of first use?
14?
Yeah, I would say the average age is 12, 13, or 14. 16 is old. When somebody says I was 16, I always have to actually ask the question again, because I think maybe they didn't hear me. So the average age of first use, alcohol, nicotine, or marijuana is 12, 13, or 14. That is 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. So So when the first time this conversation is happening is in 10th grade health class, that's crazy, right? That horse is so far out of the barn. This is a 5th grade beginning conversation in school. That's what this is. Now I'm not telling you you're going into the details of heroin in 5th grade, but you are talking about the developing brain and what can go off course, because we're heading into a time where kids start to experiment, okay? So if you are 15 years old and you start drinking, and drinking here is defined as 2 alcoholic beverages a week at the age of 15, 40% of those kids become alcoholics. If they postpone their use to age 21, 7% become alcoholics. That is a huge difference, and 7% is almost half the rate of national average of addiction to alcohol. So this is about delaying use as long as possible, and when I sit down with somebody, a kid I take care of in my office, and I'm a family doctor, so I take care of multiple generations in a family. I often know the kid's parents, I know who's struggling with what, I know the grandmother, I know the dad is at the jail, like I know way too much about everybody. It's very easy for me to look at that 14-year-old who also knows what's going on to say, you love are at high risk for developing addiction, and I know that's not what you want. I know you're really angry at your dad, I know that you are scared about your relationship with your mom because it feels really tenuous, and I know, because you've told me this is not the path you want. You get to do only one thing on this. You have got to be the kid who shows up at the after prom party at the age of 17 and says, I'm not drinking. I need you to practice with me right now 10 different ways, and you're going to say no when somebody offers you that first vape THC product or first vape cigarette. Because anything you do that's going to expose your brain while it develops with your genetic predisposition, you are incredibly vulnerable. And we can get you to the age of 22, 23, or 24 without having used anything. You have almost entirely bypassed your genetics. The genetics almost entirely disappear, right? They get down to like 5%. That's amazing. When do you guys get to do that with any disease? Really? Nothing. And you think to yourself, why don't our kids learn this stuff, right? Like, we could prevent a disease with really good education. Okay, so the truth about our kids is they're actually making really good decisions, right? When you ask a 15-year-old what they think of cigarettes, what do they say to you? What was the word? Gross, disgusting, they're horrified. Do you remember people remember having toddlers in the car, and my toddlers were like, Mom, someone's smoking. And I was like, I know, people smoke, it's not illegal, it's not good for them, but they were horrified, they were so disgusted because the public education about tobacco's cancer sticks has been huge. That generation is thought that they will eradicate Joe Camel, right? The Marlboro Man will go away because our kids are making such awesome decisions. So as sense of harm has gone up, use has gone down. This is the problem. Sense of harm with marijuana is way low, right? So what did you know or think you know that kids think about pot? It's okay. It's all good. What else?
It's natural.
It's natural, it's organic, grows in the ground, better than the pharmaceuticals. What else?
Not better than alcohol.
They always compare it to alcohol. They compare it to the other legal drug and say it's better than alcohol. People are in less harm's way, they're less violent, they're less dangerous than alcohol. Exactly. What else?
It helps people.
It helps me. It helps me sleep. It helps my anxiety. I have kids tell me they perform better in school and on the athletic field when they're high. That's really hard for me to believe, right? But think about what sport involves really slowed reaction time. There is no sport. I try not to laugh in their face, but internally I just laugh in their face because that's ridiculous. What else? A couple more. Anybody else? Can't get addicted to pot. That's what they said. And the other one is it won't kill you. You're not going to overdose on it. So there's a tiny bit of truth in some of the things that are said, but a lot of it's just plain wrong, quite honestly. It's legal. It is legal. I'm going to say that one is true. It has become legal in Massachusetts over the age of 21 to grow marijuana, and as of July 1 to go purchase it at a store. Okay, so let's talk about the brain development. So who in this room works with kids? What do you guys do?
Social worker.
You're a social worker. What do you do?
In a pediatric practice.
There are 3 things that happen during adolescence between the ages of 12 and 24 that are very specific, and one of the things really only happens during this time. So from the time you are born until about the age of 9, maybe 10, maybe 12, you are throwing out huge numbers of synapses. You have tens of billions of these little electrical currents in your brain. You have a hot, tangled mess of a brain. You're supposed to have that. It's what's supposed to happen. But between the ages of 12 and 24, your entire job, you're not even aware you're doing it, is to prune it back. There's something called synaptic refinement. And this hot, tangled mess of a brain is not actually a healthy brain as you get older. The job of the adolescent brain is to figure out what does it need to hold on to and what does it need to get rid of, okay? Because this is what leaves you with a healthy, efficient, quick-moving, fast-acting, good-quality brain. So there are times during adolescence where you are losing 30,000 synapses a second. And it would be awesome if while they were losing 30,000 synapses a second that they were rehearsing for the Wizard of Oz on a stage, or running around on an athletic field, or hanging out with their friends and playing cards. And it would be better, those things, than sitting in their basement doing a bowl of weed. Because the impact of what you're doing during adolescence impacts what stays and what goes. So the second thing that happens during this time and a little earlier than this time is myelination. It's changing gray matter to white matter, insulating fast pathways in the brain. So this is what changes your road into a brain from little dusty country roads to these super highways, where again, this is about making efficient, good quality decisions. So this is happening during this stage of the game too. So these kids of ours, I have 3 teenagers in the room. These kids of ours have perfect, marvelous, awesome developing brains, even though as a parent and as a doctor that takes care of adolescents, they're terrifying brains. Because this is a brain that has a very strong preference for physical activity and sensation seeking. There tends to be some impulse control issues. There tends to be less than optimal planning. There tends to be a lot of act first, think later. There's a very strong hypersensitivity to social exclusion. This is almost entirely what defines adolescence. And I want you to pause on this. Being hypersensitive to being excluded. When you were in 2nd grade and you were sitting by yourself at the lunch table, you were like, la-di-da-di-da, and you were turning your napkin into like a little hat. Like, you cared maybe a little bit, but you didn't care that much. And when you were 27 and you were sitting by yourself at a grad school table, you picked up your phone and read the New York Times, but you didn't sit there and think, is everybody looking at me? Do I look bad? Am I a bad person? Why isn't anybody talking to me? Did so-and-so say something? Right? But when you're a teenager, that's what's racing through your brain. These crazy, negative self-talk, right, is what defines us as adolescents. Now, most of us would not go back to middle school or high school for this reason. Is because it actually felt bad. Even if you were the most popular kid, the smartest kid, the best athletic kid, that internal self-talk in your brain, thinking about how you were perceived by everyone around you, it feels rotten. It just does. But yet, it is the nature of the adolescent brain. It's actually what defines it. And it is the reason, hypersensitivity to exclusion, why teenagers are much more likely to say, sure, I'm in. You want to go vape with me in the bathroom? I'm in. Because they so desperately do not want to be excluded, right? Influence of peers is huge at this stage. And it's why knowing who your kids' friends are really matters. Because your kids' friends really impact your kids, or your nieces and nephews or grandkids, or whatever we're talking about. So emotions are felt really, really widely. And again, there's nothing faulty about this brain. This is a brain that is trying to figure out who its herd is, because that's the job, evolutionarily speaking, for their people, and it's trying to figure out what do they need to hold on to and what do they need to get rid of. Not a faulty brain, it's just that we want to support a healthy developing brain. So there's a third thing that happens during brain development, and that is the final cortex, the outer shell of the brain, the dopamine receptors get laid out. And you guys already know how dopamine gets impacted with addiction. It's the reason why all addiction is a developmental pediatric disease. In the outer cortex, the dopamine receptors get laid out for the final time. There's another receptor that becomes active at this time, and it's called anandamine. We don't even know exactly what anandamine's role is, but we think it has to do with deciding the synaptic refinement, what gets pruned back and what gets held onto. And the problem with anandamine is that it is a naturally occurring neuroendocannabinoid. It looks just like THC, and in fact, your brain is unable to tell THC, which is the psychoactive cannabinoid in marijuana. It cannot tell THC apart from your naturally occurring one, and THC is actually more potent than your naturally occurring anandamine. And so THC locks itself into this receptor that helps decide what gets pruned back. And so it is like using a sledgehammer on this developing brain instead of a surgical scalpel. What somebody does with pot in the privacy of their own home, over the age of 25, as long as they do not put anybody else in harm's way. They do not drive, they do not babysit my kids, they don't operate on my knee or change the lug nuts on my tire. I don't really care, right? I was not in favor of this ballot measure passing because I know the way substance use works. And if your job was to sell an addictive substance, and you knew the pathway to addiction involved the developing brain, then who are you going to try to addict? You think I am the pop market's market? They're going to go after a 50-year-old woman who's never used it before? No, I'm not their market. My kids are their market, right? And I'm not being paranoid, right? I'm not a crazy person. I'm just telling you the way the system works. This is a market-based system. Their job, the marijuana industry, is to addict as many of our kids as possible, knowing what we know about this brain. And I am telling you that THC is a neurotoxic drug to the developing brain. That is the problem. And the chasm, the space between what our kids think about pot and what those of us who think we know something about pot, the chasm is great. And that is the second problem here, is that they are convinced of one thing and lots of us are convinced of another thing. And we need to get those two things closer together. Okay, so marijuana use, cognitive impact, attention, verbal learning, memory, processing speed, and that stays even when you're not high. This is what is known as the Christchurch study out of New Zealand, and I'm going to talk you through it. It followed people for, this study was not the Dunedin Study, it was followed people for 30 years. This followed people over 25 years. So I'm going to compare the gray bar to the red bar just to show you the extremes, okay? The gray bar is a category of people who used marijuana 0 times between the ages of 14 and 21. No use, no teenage use of pot, okay? And I'm going to compare it to people who used marijuana 400 times or more between the ages of 14 and 21. Now 400 seems like a big number, but I just described 7 years. 400 uses over 7 years, that actually isn't that much. That's using a couple times a week, right? Not heavy use, not daily use, right? Just a couple times a week, which is very typical, okay? So graduating from college by age 25, the people who use marijuana 0 times, 36% graduated. The people who use marijuana 400 times or more, 2% graduated. Unemployment. People who use marijuana 0 times were unemployed at age 25, 21%. People who use marijuana 400 times or more, 52% of them were unemployed by age 25. Being dependent on welfare, that doesn't happen in this country in the same way, but the social network and social safety net in New Zealand is much better or much more extensive. But 57% of people were on the social welfare system in New Zealand. They used 400 times more. For me, this is a failure to launch kid. This is a kid who's still living in my basement, who is not working, who's not contributing to society. And I like my kids a lot, but lots of days I'm like, bye-bye, love ya, go to school, do your stuff, pay your taxes, take care of the dog, do what you're supposed to do. Don't be living at my house off of my hard work, right? That's what I want for all of our kids. I want us to grow up kids who are going to be happy and contribute to society. And for me, the concern is that their sense is this is all good, and I'm arguing this is not all good. So the Dunedin Study, which followed people up to the age of 40, showed an 8-point drop in IQ by age 35. And the problem with any study I'm going to show you is it's based on the old pot. It's based on marijuana that was sitting at 3% THC or less, because up until about 1995, that's all we had, was pot that was the pot that the people in this room used. It was pretty strong, maybe strong enough, but it didn't matter. It doesn't exist anymore. It's living in some like rare seed safety vault in Holland. It doesn't exist, pot that has 3% THC. Today's marijuana grown in the field is sitting between 90% and 16% THC, and that's the stuff that's growing in the fields behind my house, right? I live in the Happy Valley. There's a lot of pot growing. And the THC concentrates are actually the stuff that our kids know. So this is shatter, butter, earwax. This is stuff where you take the plant and you force butane through it and you extract the THC. So this is between 50 and 90% THC. And this is what our kids are exposed to. So if you think that a 50% THC is building a healthier brain, making your kids smarter, improving their IQ, then I got some land in a swamp to sell you. Because here I am describing the harmful cognitive effects of a very low potency pot. This stuff is like comparing Tylenol to fentanyl. They are out of each other's league. This is a very concerning new state of affairs where we are. The second thing is that there's 1,000 ways you can get pot in your system. You can smoke it, you can vape it, you can rub it on your skin, it comes in a cream, it comes in a tincture under the tongue, it comes in milk and beer and spaghetti sauce. Every way imaginable, you can get it, you can go Google it, and they will tell you how to make it. And this is the real thing. The industry is targeting our kids. This is stuff that comes out of the Colorado stores. And if you tell me that little old ladies dying of cancer are eating gummy bears or cotton candy marijuana, they're not. This is intentionally trying to hook our kids. Now, the one upside to the Cannabinoid Commission in Massachusetts is they did say they're required to have edibles. It's part of the requirement of the ballot measure. But they did say there could be no look-alike candy. So you can't have gummies in the shape of an animal. You can have gummy cubes or gummy spheres. You cannot have a Kit Kat or an Oreo look-alike. You can have plenty of sweets and chocolate and other things, but they can't be so convincing. Now the truth is, until these stores really open and people like you and me go in there and challenge it, I have no idea. Every one of those candy bars has 12 servings in it, 12 servings of pot, and they're all sitting between 50 and 80% THC. So the last time that any one of you took a Kit Kat and broke it into 12 pieces, consumed one piece and left the other 11 hanging out, right? Nobody does that, right? So this is I don't know, is anybody else concerned in the room? It's pretty concerning. Is marijuana addictive? So we always used to say that nicotine, sugar is the most addictive substance we know, right? But nicotine has always been number 2, that if you pick up a cigarette, 32% of people are instantly on, right? In like Flint. So we used to say marijuana was the lowest of the addictive things. It was about 9% addictivity back in the old days. But when you start as a teenager, if you start as a teenager with the old potency stuff, about 17% get addicted. And if you use today's marijuana, between 30 and 50% of teenagers get addicted, which means we now have a substance that's now more addictive than nicotine. And we just gave it free rein in the fine state of Massachusetts, right? A state that really should be leading the world in terms of public health prevention. Okay, this is just a great article that compares marijuana to nicotine. Like, didn't we ever learn any lessons about what happened in the last 120 years of the tobacco industry? We should have learned some lessons. The first thing that tobacco did when the industry took over in 1900. So first of all, tobacco is a native plant of North America. The native people here used it intermittently. They used it for rituals. It was not the equivalent of a pack a day being smoked. In the year 1900, the first thing the tobacco industry did is they planted a more potent tobacco plant. A plant with bigger leaves and fatter veins, because that's what contains the nicotine. And then they added all these other chemicals to it, right? So that it made it more addictive, like what we do. They concentrated it, and then they wrapped it in paper and put 20 in a box and called it a pack of cigarettes, right? And by the year 1950, 70% of American men were smoking cigarettes. And do I think 70% of people are going to be using marijuana every day in another 20 years? No, I don't think that. But I do think that a big chunk of the generation that is coming up will have been exposed to marijuana and will have been set off course by it. So this is the first time, it started last year, where cigarette use, which is the white line, has now dropped so low that marijuana use has gone over. It's a funny slide because what it looks like is marijuana use is pretty flat, but what it doesn't describe is the daily use. That the way it is that they're comparing just the last 30 days. And when my kids in my office use pot, they're like, I smoke every day, all day. It's the first thing I do when I wake up in the morning, and then I smoke in the school bathroom at 11, and then I smoke at 1 during English class, and then I vape when I get home. Like, the exposure to marijuana at a higher potency is even higher. So let's go to alcohol. I know I'm just going to flip on you really fast, but in this country, 1/3 of us in this country drink absolutely zero. And 1/3 of us in this country drink just a little bit, very light social drinkers. A couple drinks a month, a drink a week, very light social drinkers. And the final 1/3 of us drink everything else in the entire country. The final 10% of us on average drink 10 drinks a day. That's a big number, 10%. Some people are now arguing, because the numbers are starting to shift, it's as high as 13% of us are drinking 10 drinks a day. That's a lot of alcohol, right? That's what you think, but it adds up fast. So a 12-ounce beer at 5% alcohol is 1 drink. A glass of wine is 5 ounces. That is critical to remember this number.
Not my glass.
Not in your glass, right? There we go. And then hard alcohol is 1.5 ounces. So when I sit at a bar and I watch the bartender mix drinks, I've had like 50 jobs. I've done everything practically you could be. I've never been a bartender, and I've regretted that. I would have liked being a bartender. I'm fast. I'm like multitasking all the time. I'm a chemist, so I want to be a bartender someday. But I like to watch these people mix drinks because I'm watching them. Blah, 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 blah. Most cocktails have 3 drinks in them. When you're doing the math on it, just acknowledge what you're drinking. So if you're going out with your girlfriends and you have a couple cocktails, just take a break and acknowledge you probably just have 5 to 6 drinks. Okay, you've got to do your math. So this is the problem, is that my lovely woman in the back says the truth about many of us as women, which is I ask women all the time, tell me about your relationship to alcohol, and they say, oh, you know, I have a couple glasses at night. I'm like, oh yeah, what are you drinking? I drink wine. What are you pouring? You know, a normal size. Because wine glasses are mason jars on a stick, right? They're huge, and most of us, you know, when somebody pours you a glass of wine at a restaurant, most often I look at it, I'm like, $9 for that? And they go to the bottom, right? But that's 5 ounces. If you actually measure what they're pouring, that's what 5 ounces looks like. And what I say to my patients is, just put 5 ounces of water in your wine glass and acknowledge the truth, which is, that's a glass. And then acknowledge your second truth, which is probably you're pouring 12 to 15 ounces of every one of your glasses. Just acknowledge them, that's all. I'm not gonna shame you about it, I'm just gonna say, you're probably having 5 to 6 to maybe 7 glasses every night. And then I need you to ask, why am I drinking like that? What is that about? Because so many of us as adults walk into the house after a terrible day at work. The first thing our kids see is they watch us flip the top of the beer bottle or uncork a bottle of wine. And the message we send to our kids is when you're stressed, when you're overwhelmed, you should drink. And more of us that walk in the door and say, man, I had a terrible day today. I need to go for a run. Can somebody start dinner while I go for a run? I'm going to go walk the dog. Anybody want to walk the dog with me? I'm going to go hit John Kabat-Zinn app on my smartphone. I'm going to go sit down on my yoga mat in the living room, and I'm going to go quiet on my brain for 15 minutes because I'm a hot mess. If our kids watched us do healthy things to cope and manage with our stress, they would be better off. And instead, the modeling that so many of us do with our kids is often food or alcohol. And we have to change that as adults. Think about the last time you went out with your girlfriends and didn't drink. The last time you had an adult party where alcohol wasn't incredibly prominent. It's time we shift a little bit on this. It's not good. There's very little health benefit to alcohol. I know people are like, oh, red wine's so good for you. That study was probably done on 1 ounce, and I swear it's funded by the alcohol industry. Don't get me wrong, I drink. It's not like I don't drink. I do, but I'm very, very aware of how I drink now. If I have had a terrible day and I think to myself, I need a drink, boom, I don't get to drink that day. If that thought ever crosses my brain, oh, just knock that one off the list because I'm self-medicated. So this is it. People say to me all the time, but I want to train my kid to drink before they go to college. One of my best friends told me this. She said, I sat down with my 18-year-old. We were in wherever they were in a Caribbean island where the legal age to drink was 18. She said, we sat down and had a drink so we could teach him. And I think to myself, please tell me you didn't do this, because I know her genetic risk in her family on both sides is huge. So what it shows is that when parents give their kids alcohol to train them, they just have kids who drink more. They just have kids at higher rates, more likely to binge drink, more likely to develop the disease. This is really about brain development. You don't need to train your kid to drink. Honestly, you don't. The guideline going off to college is you're going to teach them what you know about this, and just say, look, you're 18 years old. Most people in college drink way too much. They do completely out of control behavior. Most assaults on campus, one or both of the parties were under the influence, period. And if we could go back in time and have one or both of them be sober, it wouldn't have happened, right? And if your job is to go to the frat party and stand there with your red Solo cup with ginger ale in it and just help protect every other freshman in the room who's about to launch themselves down one of the worst nights of their lives, you will have saved somebody's life, right? I tell you, our kids actually want to feel like knights in shining armor. And I do not have perfect kids. I was about to kill one of my kids this morning, but you know, I think that heading off to college, you try to empower them as much as possible. My son, when he went to college, he knew basic life support, he knew he was Red Cross certified, he knew to go to a party to keep his eye out on people. So after, I never talked to the kid, he's off at college, he's happy, I only hear from him when he's not okay. But after that first night at school, maybe a week later, I said, hey, how's college? And he's like, well, I spent 2 nights in the ER this week. And I'm thinking, are you kidding me? I sent that first kid to college, he's in the emergency room already, it's not a good outcome. And he said, he went to 2 parties, and these kids had no idea what they were doing. They were trashed, they were passed out drunk, and his decision-making was like, can I Uber them, or do I call 911? So 2 full nights of his first week in the ER, 5 nights of his first year in the ER with kids who were trashed, drunk, and weren't safe to be home. In one case, he just rescued a woman who was being hauled up the stairs because that was a rape waiting to happen, right? And more of our kids who can say, wow, my friend is so drunk, he's hanging all over that other person, probably not in a good position to make good consenting decisions. So let's me lure him away. Even if he gets mad at me, let me get him out of the situation, because you know what? It destroys that person's life too. So this is not a good thing. People will say this to me. They'll say, but in Europe they drink all the time and they're all good. But let's look at where alcoholism is highest in the world. Ready? Oh, look at those green areas. All in Europe. Granted, it's mostly Eastern Europe, but when you start to look even harder, the next level that pops up is Western Europe. Okay? So the addiction rates, Belarus, Moldova, Lithuania, Russia, Romania, it runs down the list. Interestingly, the US isn't even on the first 25 in terms of the highest rates of alcohol consumption. So you cannot tell me that you're protective when you're 16 years old and you're drinking a lot of wine in France. I don't buy it. Their brains aren't different than our kids' brains. They're the same brain. Okay, third thing that predisposes you to addiction. So who knows about the ACE study in this room? Any looks at you. Okay, so in the year 1996, a study was done. I think it was published in 1998. It was called the Adverse Childhood Experiences Study. And it came out of Kaiser San Diego in Southern California, a white middle-class population, where they surveyed 17,000 adults and asked them questions, 10 questions, at what might have happened to them under the age of 18 in their household. They did it for one specific medical reason. It ended up sort of not being, the whole study ended up not being what they expected. So I'm going to read you some of the questions. So 10 questions, fairly high literacy level. I only know it in English. So, only given to an adult, reflecting on the childhood, never administered to a child. Did a parent or another adult in your household often or very often swear at you, insult you, put you down, and humiliate you, or act in a way that made you afraid you might be harmed? Did a parent or another adult in the household often or very often push, grab, slap, or throw something at you, or ever hit you so hard that you had marks? Were you sexually abused? Did you often or very often feel that no one in your family loved you or thought you were important or special, or that your family didn't look out for each other? Did you often or very often feel that you didn't have enough to eat, had to wear dirty clothes, and had no one to protect you, or that your parents were too drunk or too high to take you to the doctor if you were sick? Were your parents separated or divorced? Did you watch your dad or your stepdad physically harm your mom or your stepmom? Was there somebody in your household with major mental illness, including suicidal thoughts? Was there somebody in your household who was incarcerated? I think I got 9 out of 10, but 10 questions. Measuring household dysfunction, household neglect, and household abuse. And if you score a 6 or higher on an ACE score, you have just taken 20 years off your life. If you score a 4 or higher on an ACE score, you will have much higher rates of dying from a heart attack, emphysema, asthma, multiple broken bones, multiple sexual partners. It is one of the biggest predictors we know of who is going to struggle with chronic disease and bad life outcomes. And the CDC has been investing a lot of money in helping to understand what the ACE score means and how it impacts us. It is one of the biggest predictors of who is going to struggle with addiction. And I think sometimes when I'm at this point, I think people are thinking, this woman's a lunatic, I've never heard of this thing. How come this thing is so prevalent and it has such a big impact that only one person in the room knows about it? This is changing, right? More and more and more and more people are learning about this. People in the medical field, people in the education field. Kids with high ACE scores are disruptive. They have very poor attention. They tend to act out a lot. They tend to have a lot of poor impulse control. What do they look like? ADHD. They look just like ADHD looks, right? And we often are over-medicating our kids for ADHD diagnosis when we're actually treating trauma. And I tell you, stimulants don't treat trauma. Kids with a high ACE score do not do well in school. Rates of suspension, the rates of not graduating from high school are huge. And there are schools in this country that really focus on kids with history of trauma and actually doing a really good job right now. Massachusetts has some curriculums that are considered trauma-informed, and the North Shore is way ahead of other places in sort of developing more trauma-informed curriculum in schools and recognizing kids with high trauma and what it looks like in a classroom. Because it's hard for teachers, but it's really hard for the kids. And I think it's hard for you to imagine, like, why would having a terrible, awful, miserable childhood lead you to have COPD or asthma. Like, what's the connection? But I'm going to say to you, that fight or flight response that we are designed to have, that spiking cortisol level in your brain when you're being chased by a wild boar 1,000 years ago, is designed to be on for 20 minutes while you sprint fast, and then you find shelter and you cower down and you settle down and your cortisol goes back to normal. That's how we are designed. When you are a kid who's worried that they're going to come back from kindergarten and find their mom overdosed in the bathroom, when you are a kid who's worried about where their next meal comes from, when you are a kid who lives in fear at night from the creaking stairs coming up to your bed, you are a kid who has spiking cortisol levels 24 hours a day for years without it. And that is a neurotoxic drug to the brain, but also to every organ in the body. It has a huge impact. And one of the responses to today's opiate epidemic needs to be acknowledging the role that trauma has played in it, and getting a treatment provider network that treats trauma. It is absolutely critical. And when we looked at my little county, Franklin County, the poorest, the most rural county in Massachusetts, we're way ahead on the opiate treatment side. We have been working together for years. CNN, the reason I was really late in CNN was at my jail doing an interview of us at the jail, looking at the really cutting edge work that we do. One of the things we did fairly early on is we said, okay, every treatment provider out there, who is doing trauma treatment? Who is doing EMDR, EFT? Who is doing dialectical behavioral therapy? Who is doing somatic experiencing treatment? Like, who is coming at the real problem here? And a lot of people are like, not yet, but we'll get there. We're like, chop to it, right? Like, get it going now. And instead, I have a county. It's not perfect. I don't have enough child therapists that do trauma yet, but we're building it. Like, that is a real problem. And I guess in a senior center, that means you may not think of that as being your problem, but if you guys are all community activists, I have a sense you guys are public health community activists. This is something that has to get better. Okay, 3 things. Genetics and trauma and early exposure. You do not need all 3. Sadly, you just need 1. But when you have all 3, you're really a predictive person who's going to struggle with addiction. You just are. And my message to parents is, look, talk to your kids. Talk to them. Talk to them frequently and just ask them to delay their use. I don't say to my own kids, don't ever drink, it's going to kill you. Pot's a deadly drug. I just say, look, you guys have history of addiction in your family. You need to postpone your use as long as possible. You need to avoid drugs like nicotine forever, right? You need to avoid use of marijuana really until the age of 25. And you need to have very limited, if any, interaction with alcohol for a long time, 22 or 23, most women. Now, have they been perfect? No, they haven't, right? I have a kid in college. I can't control that. That's out of my league, but he understands this stuff because he's seen the talk, right? It's not much for kids to see the talk. Okay, so again, our kids are doing awesome. Alcohol rates are the lowest they've ever been. This is mainly public health measures. Can you walk into a liquor store at the age of 18 and buy alcohol? Hell no. You just can't. You can't do it anymore. Who gets carded still in this room? You get carded. Right, people get carded. You should be carded. That's what you want. I want everybody in this room to get carded because you should be. Cigarette use, again, this generation is awesome. Illicit drugs, flat, and that's mainly marijuana. But what's the problem with the cigarette use? You guys know this. The darn vaping and the e-cigarettes have exploded. We've had them for 8 years. They've been on the down low. We've had some schools that have had some issues. Actually, where we are sitting right now, the western suburbs of Boston have had a little spike in the last 2 years, but something flipped in the last 9 months where it went crazy. So I actually haven't been to Acton High School, but I talk in the area all the time. And I just know, I know what the school resource officers pick up. They are picking up in a single day what they may have picked up in all of last year, because it has become a massive problem. So when you ask, this is already too old. This is 2017 data about how much kids are using. It is ancient compared to what happened this year. So in this room, you guys know that the e-cigarette vaping world is a very high-tech world. It used to be that you would have these big, heavy cords that lit up. They were like old school. They are not that. They look like little tiny USB thumb drives. They are smaller than the thumb drive that I just brought in, and they're way cooler looking than this. And they're skinny, and you can put any juice in them you want. And what we know is that what the kids say, my 13-year-old said this to me not so long ago. She said, Mom, you're such a freak. You're so crazy about this stuff. It's just water vapor and flavoring. And I was like, oh, no, it's not. That's what they tell you it is, right? because it's a largely unregulated industry. It is not water vapor and flavor. It's water vapor and some flavor and about 12 preservatives that we don't know what it causes because there's no long-term study on it, and nicotine. She says, it says 0 milligrams of nicotine. I say, oh yeah, this study just came out a month ago. They surveyed 70 American-made e-juices, all of which were labeled 0 milligrams of nicotine. What percent of them had nicotine in them? 90%, right? Some of which had the equivalent of a pack of cigarettes in it. 0 milligrams of nicotine was actually equal to a pack of cigarettes. They are lying to our kids. They're lying to every one of us, right? They just are lying because they're unregulated. Nobody is watching the store on this stuff. So FDA just this week sent out warning letters to the companies. Because look what this is. So these are e-juices. So little e-juices is a little bottle that fills up your vape pen. Okay, so it's a cheaper way to do it. You could buy one of these online easily, and then you could bring it to school, and the kids at school will pay you a little extra because you'll fill them up. Look what these things look like, you guys. This looks like a juice box. A juice box. It's e-juice, right? Apple juice flavor. This is in the flavor of whipped cream, right? And this one is a vanilla cookie flavored e-juice. You think truck drivers are using this stuff to stop smoking? This is intended for your kids, period. There's no way around this. And again, I'm not paranoid, but this is what the industry is doing. They are selling products. If I saw that e-juice in a kid's lunchbox at lunch, I wouldn't look twice at it. I'd be like, oh, they brought apple juice today. It is a nicotine or, quite honestly, THC-filled e-juice that people are refilling up their vape pens. So the FDA sent out warning letters to these companies saying, you know what, you probably shouldn't be doing this. It's not so good. That's not good enough for me. I think these people should be shut down. So these are the Juul cigarettes. These guys don't lie. They're like, yeah, we're filled with nicotine, right? They just are filled with nicotine. And again, this little thing here, right? This is this little tiny rechargeable USB port. It's like a centimeter. You can smoke this thing in class, in school, in the back of English class. You blow it doesn't make a huge amount of vape. You just blow it into your shirt, into your hoodie, into your backpack. No one knows. You are literally getting high in the back of English class. No one knows. And you can fill those things up with anything. So I get school resource officers who show me this is 97% THC e-juice liquid that goes and fills the Juuls. So this is a problem. Welcome to our new industry, and our kids who are making really good decisions about smoking have accidentally entered into this world. Not accidentally, and this is the smoking industry that's trying to make some more money. So this is pretty frustrating. And where do they buy this stuff?
Gas stations.
Gas stations. Do you think the gas stations are carding these kids? Nope. They're not at all. And where else are they really getting it where nobody cards?
Online.
Online. And what do you have to do to prove you're 21 online?
Check a box.
Check a box. I'm 21. I'm only 11, but I'm 21 right now, right? What would you guys do to prevent that? What could you do?
Not give them a credit card.
Exactly. So there's the first one. Where are they getting the way to buy it? So first of all, my purse sits on the kitchen counter all day long. My kids could take out a credit card. But secondly, our kids get Visa gift cards from grandparents, right? And most of us, I couldn't tell you where my kid's birthday Visa card went. I don't know. They bought something online. Did they buy something good? I hope so. I don't really remember. I'm not home with them 24 hours a day. So the access, and it doesn't, it's not your kid, it's actually the other kids, right? It's the kid who actually has their own credit card, whose parents aren't paying any attention, who buys 10 of these and then sells it to the other kids. So they buy it online. But can you imagine a world where, I mean, again, I'm not asking for the world here, guys. I'm saying that maybe the first age of purchase should be 25. How would that be? And guess what? I have a smartphone. You have to take a picture of your government-issued ID to go to the website. What if that had to happen, right? Again, could you get a fake ID? You could, but it would be a lot more work. I just need some more barriers to be put up here. Okay, smartphones. Who thinks their kid could be addicted to a smartphone? Who personally thinks they themselves might have developed a little bit of an unhealthy interaction, right? A lot of us have it, right? So this is, you guys don't have time for this, but this is a really common problem. I do want to talk about opiates. So do you guys have a little bit of an opiate problem in this region? Yeah, could name me a region that doesn't. There's no way, I couldn't go to any town, unless they're just lying to me, right? Who says they don't have a problem. This is New England-wide, this is the entire eastern seaboard. There are very few regions, and I travel all over the place, that is not struggling with opiates of some shape or fashion. So every morning I make my coffee, I walk the dog, I read the paper, and the first thing I read in the paper is the opiate doctors because I take care of old people who are going to die. I need to know who died last night. I need to fill out a death certificate when I get to work, and I need to call the family. That's my routine. And in this December of 2012, I read the obituary of the young woman in the upper left, and it read, Ashley Sims, age 21, died of a heroin overdose at home. And I thought to myself, I know her. And I know her grandmothers who raised her, and I called them to tell them how heartbroken I was about her death. But also to thank them for telling the truth about how Ashley died. And then they went above and beyond, because then they marched down to the local paper and said, you have got to start telling the story about how Ashley died, because this is the story of our ravaged community. This isn't just Ashley, this is hundreds of people who live right here in town who are struggling with an opiate use disorder. And this was 1,000 years ago. This was 2012, right? This is before anybody was having forums or the cops were carrying Narcan, or before it had become a common thing. And so our little Greenfield reporter began writing front page stories on the opiate epidemic, which then was mainly pills with some heroin, but mostly pills, and then the heroin would be. So there's no doubt pills are on the hook for this thing. The overprescribing of opiate pills in the last 20 years started this epidemic. It's not what kills people today, but it definitely gets you going. When you look at our country compared to every other country in the world, that top dark line is the number of opiates prescribed in the United States. We don't have more pain than Canada has. We are Canadians, basically. There's no difference between us and Canada, right? Genetically, in terms of what we eat, we're about the same. Health risks, all about the same. So you can't convince me we have more pain. We just have been sold out to the consumer. So at this point, drug overdose deaths outpace deaths by gun violence, outpaced deaths by motor vehicle accidents, outpaced AIDS at the peak of the AIDS epidemic in 1994. We outpaced everything. It's the #1 killer under the age of 50 is death by overdose. That is a rapid shift that happened in the last 2 years. We're losing, we think, 127 people a day to drug overdose. And when you look at the country, the first map is 2003, and then the map starts to get redder and redder. And those red areas are places where overdose is happening at high rates. The problem is it ends in 2014, which is when fentanyl really starts to move in 2015 or 2014. So most of the pills that came to New England came from Florida. There were 600 pill mills in Florida. Sometimes there would be a strip mall with 2 pill mills in it. And there would be whole tour buses where you had your way paid down to Florida, free stays in hotels, all your meals paid for, and all you needed to do was walk into 2 pill mills a day. You had a stack of cash. You didn't need a diagnosis, you didn't need a limp, you needed nothing. And you walked out, you had no cash, but you walked out with a stack of prescriptions and several bottles of pills, which then you gave to your tour operator, who went back to Kentucky and Maine and Massachusetts and sold the drugs on the street. So that's the way it rolled for a good solid 10 years. And then in the year 2010, the federal government looked at Florida and said, if you cannot get yourselves under control with your drug problem and your dealing of illicit opiates to the rest of the country, we're going to shut off federal funding. No education funds, no highway funds. We're going to cut off your peninsula and float you to the sea. So in this 2010 DEA raids, they shut down almost every one of the pill mills in Florida. And they incarcerated 34 doctors because they were licensed practicing American trained doctors, MD after the name, but they were all drug dealers. And they had made tens of millions of dollars, and now they're incarcerated in federal prison. So the problem is, you have a couple million people, maybe more, addicted to opiates all up and down the eastern seaboard. You got no more pills left, right? Your pipeline's been shut down. What are you left with?
Heroin.
Right. You're left with a really deadly drug. You're left with a drug that's not just deadly, it's unbelievably available, and it's unbelievably cheap. I could text somebody and in 4 minutes I could have 50 bags of dope out here, right? They maybe haven't come to the senior center before, but they'll figure out how to get here. So this drug has been widely distributed starting in about 2007. They knew this was happening. They were watching it. There's a book I'll show you at the end that talks about how smart the distribution of this drug is. So when you look at the country, this is 1999 to 2010. And these red areas are places where deaths are really on the rise. Up until 2010, not many people were dying. And then you watch after the pill mills get shut down. And then you see the entire country start to light up. And again, don't get me wrong, I'm in favor of shutting down the pill mills, right? It's just the unintended consequences of a whole bunch of people being left with an opiate addiction is we were left with heroin. And in fact, now I'm left with fentanyl, right? I lost 4 patients in the last week. They died. Right? One of whom was just addicted to cocaine, but these days cocaine's laced with fentanyl, so he died too, right? This is my new normal, is I just expect people to die. I expect that people overdosed just yesterday or 2 days ago, because it's the world we're now living in. These are young people. These are people under the age of 30. Kids, families, mom and dad. So when you look at the entire country, this is county by county map. I love maps. I grew up in a house filled with maps, so I can show you maps all day. But this is a county by county map of the U.S. based on opiates prescribed. So those dark counties, there is on average between 1 and 1.5 bottles of opiate per man, woman, and child in that county. So it's an interesting distribution of where opiate pills are still widely available. And while pills are widely available, heroin doesn't need to take over. But as the CDC and the FDA and Medicare and Medicaid start to really restrict, as of January 1, Medicare and Medicaid are going to make a massive cut, we think, in the ability for people to get chronic opiates, which is really bad for people who suffer with chronic pain and actually benefit, are not addicted, but actually benefit. They're going to get cut off at the knees without much warning. When that happens, those counties that you're seeing will convert to heroin. And what I predict is we'll have 500,000 people die of an opiate overdose in the next 5 years. Because if you think those little towns, those little counties are building methadone clinics and training doctors in the management of buprenorphine, they have all their patrol cars and all their firefighters carrying Narcan, those counties aren't doing that. Those counties are doing nothing. How do our kids get opiates? In general, most of our kids don't use opiates, right? They should never, ever, ever be getting it out of your house. That's like the oldest conversation. If you still have an old bottle of Vicodin that you're hanging on to from your knee surgery, well, shame on you. That's a 2012 conversation. Every police station in Massachusetts has a drug take-back box. And I have to say, senior centers are good at this, hospice is good at this. You have got to get that drug out of your house. Your kids and your kids' friends should not be getting any controlled substance from you, right? And in 2012, it felt like sort of a exciting conversation. Be like, clean out your medicine cabinet, but it's now 2018, so I'm done with that, right? In general, we should all be prescribed less. We should keep our drugs under lock and key if they're not safe for other people. If you're actively using them, under lock and key. If you're not actively using them, get them out of your house. That's my attitude on this front. Our kids get them prescribed when they're injured, when they get their wisdom teeth out, when they break something. And my hope is, and this data shows this, that prescribing is getting better. People are being prescribed less. But they're still getting prescribed a surprising amount. So does anybody have a story they would tell me about a kid getting prescribed an opiate? Wisdom teeth? I've got some young women in this room. You guys have wisdom teeth out? Do you remember if you got prescribed anything? Vicodin, do you remember how many you've got?
No, I didn't think of it.
You took 0. You were given some, but you took 0.
Yeah.
Okay. Anybody else? Yeah.
My daughter was prescribed, she broke her arm and they gave her like, and she's an addict.
Did they screen her first to say, have you ever had trouble with this? Ooh, that's a concern, yeah. So from my perspective, it's like an allergy. Every time you write a prescription for a controlled substance, you have to screen people if they have a history of addiction. Because the last thing you want to do is be sending somebody down a rabbit hole, right? That's not her fault she broke her arm. It's not her fault she's going to have pain. But that's somebody who is really high risk for developing a relapse, right? In that when somebody prescribed, I had knee surgery about 6 months ago, and the doctor, he gave me 60. I'm 50 years old. I just had arthroscopic surgery. It's not like I had a knee replacement, right? The guy gave me 60 pills or something. I looked at that and I was like, are you kidding me? So I didn't fill it, and I went back for my follow-up and I handed it back. I said, I didn't fill your script because I want to be clear. You shouldn't be writing for 60 of anything at this point in the game for arthroscopic surgery. And secondly, no one screened me for addiction. No one asked me, have I struggled with alcohol or opiates in the past? You never write a script without screening people. And then listening to what they have to say. And it's not that I wouldn't treat somebody who struggled with addiction for pain, but I would hold them very close. I would be like, okay, love, I know you just broke your femur. That's unbelievably painful. I don't want you to be suffering, but this is how we're going to roll this thing. I'm going to write you a script every single day. We're going to come up with a plan A and plan B that don't involve opiates at all. Right? We're going to do a deep nerve block that's going to last 24 hours. It's going to cost me a little more money, but that's what we're going to do. And then I'm going to see you every single day and see how you're doing. And in fact, I'm actually going to use buprenorphine for your pain management instead, which is Suboxone, because it actually helps with pain. But it's a lot less addictive. It's a lot less hijacking of the brain. That would have been a strategy that should have happened for your daughter. If you love somebody and you're worried about them and they struggle with an opiate use disorder, you need to have Narcan. Narcan's available without a prescription at every pharmacy in Massachusetts. It's available at almost every pharmacy in the country at this point. That's a public health change. That's a good thing. Narcan is like a little nasal spray. It's like using Flonase in your nose. It's no big deal to me. It's very simple. It used to be harder. Learn to Cope is a great support group that's all over the place. They give you Narcan for free and they'll show you how to use it. This is a video, get naloxone now. It'll show you how to recognize somebody who's overdosing. What if you administer it to somebody who isn't having an overdose but they're having a seizure? Will you have hurt them? No. But will you have helped them? Probably not. You call 911 first. 911, basic life support, Narcan. Okay, you've got to follow the order. Don't ever Narcan without calling 911. Because most of us, I can't tell easily always the difference between a deep overdose and something else. It's possible. Or they overdosed on benzos, Valium, those things, they won't respond to Narcan. Okay, so you need somebody there who can protect the airway. People get better with addiction, but it's not easy. It's a struggle to get better because you need a lot of things going your way. The number one thing, I always do this thing with my patients, I make a big circle. I say everybody on their giant pie of recovery has to have sober housing. If you do not have a sober place you can return to, you're not going to get better. You can't tell me, no, I got this, I'm all good, I'm going to go back to my boyfriend even though he's still using, I'm good. I'm going to be like, girlfriend, you're not good. You're just telling yourself a giant story. You're not good, you will relapse, you can't go home again. Now you can still go back there, I can't prevent you from that, but we can acknowledge you have a terrible plan. And the biggest lack we have in Massachusetts and nationwide is structured sober living. We need more and more and more and more. We need places to go where people can stay for 90 days, 180 days, 2 years, that's what we need. Right? If it takes you a good couple of years to get better, you kind of need places that can support you for that long. Now you may think that's crazy, but this is an expensive thing. Relapse costs a lot of money. Relapse costs lives if people die. Good mental health care, addressing trauma, having a sense of purpose, going to school, getting a job. I'm a big believer in medical assisted treatment. I believe in methadone, I believe in buprenorphine, I believe in naltrexone. For alcohol use disorder, I use a whole host of meds. I will use anything I can to help you stay stable, right? Don't prescribe more addictive drugs, but I prescribe stabilizing drugs. And it's what we do at my jail, too. So we're the only jail in Massachusetts that uses medical assisted treatment. One of the only jails in the country. These are great books on addiction. This is a good time. This slide deck is available to everybody in this room. So if anybody wants the slide deck, you're just going to ask and you can get it, okay? Right there? Okay. So you can go back and read it. You can go back and use it. You can go give this talk. You can go give this talk at a high school. You can go give this talk at a treatment center. You can go give this talk anywhere you want. And I welcome. You don't have to name my name. You can say you did the whole thing. I don't care. So the slide deck is yours. So these are great books. This book here called Dreamland is how the drug got here. How smart, how high tech. It involves Uber and Lyft, regional airports, UPS. Fentanyl, which is all getting shipped to us from China. You need a tiny amount of fentanyl to impact all of the people. I'm talking like, we're talking 6 grams. I could kill practically everybody in the state. It does not take much fentanyl. It's grains of fentanyl that will kill you. So if you're really, really smart, which everybody is these days, I've just improved the product, right? Tremendously, I've improved it. I may kill some of my clients, but what do I care? I'm building more clients. So it's a very complicated marketing strategy to add fentanyl, a drug that's going to kill your clients, but that's what drug dealers do. So this Dreamland is an awesome book. Who's read any of these books? Yeah, what have you read?
Dreamland.
You read Dreamland?
Yeah, I'm from Portsmouth, Ohio.
Oh, they talk, it's all about Portsmouth, Ohio. Oh, but it's a good book, right? It's interesting.
It's unbelievable.
It's unbelievable. It's a little mind-blowing.
The League of Women Voters book read it about 2 years ago.
Oh, that's great. I'm glad to hear that. That's so funny that you're from that town. But that could have been any town. It could have been Greenfield, could have been anywhere. Good. Anybody else read any of these books? What have you read?
The Body Keeps Score.
Yeah, I knew you'd read that one. Okay, that is the best book on trauma, I think, that is out there. The Body Keeps a Score. So if I did, I raced through the ACE score of trauma, but if you thought to yourself, oh my gosh, I am the kind of person who needs to know more about trauma because I work in a pediatric office, because I am a person who interacts with people with high trauma and I need to think about that a little bit more, I would argue a lot of uniformed officers actually work with highly traumatized people. That is an amazing book. It helps you understand why it is that trauma has such a big impact on the human body and the brain, and also how to help people get better. So that's an awesome book. The book Beautiful Boy, oh, beautiful. I'm showing you my favorite books. I read lots and lots of books. But Beautiful Boy is written by David Sheff. He also wrote the book Clean. It's just beautifully written. He's a journalist, and it's about his child, his son, Nick, who struggles terribly with addiction over a period of 10 years. It's just, as a parent, I cried throughout the whole book because it's unbearable. Nick gets better, but it's really, you don't think he's going to get better ever in the book. It's really awful. But it's a great, all these books are awesome. You should read them. So I have a website. It's my name, ruthpoteet.com. And on this website, are those books, and then on this website are articles I read this week that I thought were really good. I just posted them up there. My speaking schedule is there. My videos are there. So let's pretend you're going to go take the slide deck and you're going to go give a talk, and you think, I may need to rehearse this talk first. You're going to go there and watch a video and just remind yourself what was said. I have slide decks that are actually just intended for middle school or high school, and I would send you those slide decks, right? I don't have time. I have like 18 jobs. I can't go to every high school or middle school, but you know what we can? People who speak well in this room. Take the slide deck, make it your own, get comfortable talking about it. The more we talk about this with people, the more we'll change people's minds. The more we'll be able to prevent the disease. And the more we'll be able to destigmatize the disease.